Good afternoon, everyone. So, after po ni Mrs. Roberto, I will be the one who will discuss the organizational communication, which is also part of the organizational processes po. So, first, let's define what is communication. Communication, the exchange and flow of information and ideas from one person to another. It involves a sender transmitting an idea or information to a receiver. So another definition of communication is the transmission of information from one person or group to another person or group. So pinakatatandaan lang natin to define communication is transmitting or passing the ideas from a given sender to a receiver. So yun po ang communication. And then organizational communication, almost the same rin siya. Galing rin naman siya sa communication. Ito naman po yung the ability of an individual or group within a collective establishment to transmit and receive information within that collective establishment. Ang unique lang niya or uniqueness niya lang ng organizational communication is dito nagko-communicate sila, nagpapasa sila ng idea, information na upang ma-achieve ang isang goal. So para yung goal na yon is to para sa development or sa growth ng given establishment na yun. So, yun po ang organizational communication. And as we all know, yung communication po, very important po yan in terms of the organization. Kasi yung mga communication na to, yung may mga iba't ibang proseso to, na upang para sa isang leader po, na makapag-coach, coordinate, counsel, evaluate, and supervise sa given establishment na yun. Para rin po sa kaiuunlad or ikakaganda ng kumpanya or ng organization na yun. So, napakahalaga po ng communication within the organization. At may iba't ibang parte po ito or iba't ibang function or elements. So, let's now proceed po sa next slide po. So, here po we have the elements of communication. So, may iba't ibang elemento po ang communication. So, first of them is the sender or the encoder. Basic definition of that is the communicator, the one who has an idea or purpose to communicate or send a message. Bali siya yung nagsasend ng message, kung encoder, taga-type po ng or taga-encode ng message o ng information na pinapasa sa receiver po. And then, another element is the medium. Medium is the immediate form which a message take. So, dito po, yung medium, parang siya yung way of or kung paano ipapasa yung message. Kung paano ba, through letter, email, or harapan ba, or speech form. Yan po ang medium. And the next po is the channel. Channel is the message carrier responsible for the delivery of the chosen message. So, chosen message form. So, bale, it's either pwedeng cellphone po yung channel na yon kasi ito yung carrier na message or through internet, post office, kung letter man, radio, computer, fax, or memo. Depende po kung anong form ang ginawa ni sender po. So, yun yung channel po, bale. And then next is the receiver or the decoder. Ito naman po yung responsible for decoding meaning from the message. So, bali po, ito yung taga-receive po, bali. And then, i-decode niya kung anong nilalaman ng message, kung anong ibig sabihin po. So, that is the fourth element ng communication. And then, after po ng receiver or decoder, which is the feedback. Feedback is the response from the receiver or decoder to the sender or the encoder. So, bali, ito po yung magiging yun nga po, from the word response, kung magiging reply niya, kung ano magiging sagot niya doon sa message or information na pinasa na nanggaling sa sender. So, bali po, para saan ba tong feedback? Yung feedback po, bali ang siyang nagsasabi kung naintindihan ba or nakuha ba talaga nung decoder or nung receiver yung intention na message nung sender sa kanya. And then next element po bale in the communication is the context. Context is the way the message is delivered. So, bali dito kung paano ipinadala yung message. Kasi may tinatawag po tayong paralanguage, bali the nonverbal element in speech. So, it's either the intonation of the voice, the body language, the posture, the hand gesture po, na discuss ko rin po mamaya. So, kung paano sinend yung message na yon. Is it maganda ba ang mensahe na yon or negative ba ang meaning ng mensahe na yon based on that context po. And then, we have the noise or interferences. Ito naman po yung any factor that inhibits the conveyance of a message or anything that gets in the way of the message. So, bali, ito po, yung mga interference or the noise, bali po, ay yung mga hadlang para makarating doon sa receiver yung message na pinapasend ng sender. So, yun po ang iba't ibang elements of the communication. So, next is the principles of communication. So, ano-ano po ba yung mga principles ng communication? So, we have the communication is a process. Bakit po nasabing process? Because it involves series of actions which are ongoing and is constantly changing po or nagbabago po ng patuloy-tuloy. So, kasi po ang communication, hindi lang po basta makapag-send ng message yan. Tulad ng sa elements po, may iba't ibang proseso or elements nga po na dinadaanan. Hindi lang yung bastang makarating ka agad kay receiver. So, that's why communication is a process. Next is communication is a system po. So, bakit nga ba siya tinawag na system rin? So, dito kasi kaya naging system siya kasi kung may isang parte po ng communication ng hindi umaayon or hindi gumagana, syempre yung ibang parte ay maapektuhan. Let's say yung sa elements po. Pagka halimbawa ay hindi ganun ka-effective yung channel na ginamit, yung ginamit doon, halimbawa cellphone ang ginamit at hindi gumana yung part na yun, hindi makakarating dun sa receiver message or halimbawa nasira or nag-iba yung format kasi halimbawa ang pinanggalingan na phone ay Android, pinasa sa iPhone or Apple, nagulo yung format ng message, hindi nakarating na maayos yung message. So, kaya dun siya naging system. Kailangan yung mga iba't ibang parte niya ay nagpa-function ng maayos. Next is a communication is interactional and transactional. So now, paano naging interactional po ang communication? Dahil ang communication po, in terms of interaction, let's say yung isang sender magsasend ng message, makipag-usap, then after that, magbibigay rin ng message yung isang tao. So, palitan sila ng impormasyon. That is interactional. So, next is the part of transactional po. So, communication is transactional because dito naman po ay halimbawa, in terms of business po, may transaction na po nagaganap. Si halimbawa si person A, he is about sender and receiver. Then, ganun rin yung nakakausap niya, which is, let's say, person B. They are both sender and receiver. Hindi naman po ibig sabihin na sabay sila nagsasalita at sabay sila nagre-receive. Parang nagpapalitan rin sila ng informasyon. Unlike sa interactional, salitan sila. Dito, salitan in terms of sender siya, then receiver yung isa. More on socializing ang interaction kasi ang transaction palitan po. So, kaya transactional siya. Then the last one, communication is intentional or pwede ring unintentional. So intentional siya in terms of Yung isang tao ay nagko-communicate dahil meron siyang gustong iparating na message. So that is intentional. So pwede rin unintentional, halimbawa, um, sa daan nakabunggo ka ng isang tao, pwedeng unintentional message yun na nagmark ka sa kanya na ibig sabihin ay parang disrespect sa kanya kaya magagalit siya. So that is unintentional. Kaya pwedeng intentional and unintentional ang isang communication. So yun po ang sa principles of communication po. So now let's proceed to the function po ng communication. So the functions of communications po, we have some several functions. So eto na po yun. So first is to seek information. Siyempre, upang makapaghanap tayo ng informasyon or makareceive tayo ng informasyon. Then next is to disseminate information. Makapakalat po bale or makapagbigay impormasyon. Next is to educate. Another is to persuade, to influence. Yan po yung um, ibang functions. And then we have to discover information and to uncover information. So ito po yung iba't ibang function po ng communication. So hindi ko na po masyadong elaborate. So very self-explanatory naman po ito. Then next, let's proceed to the types of communication. So may iba't ibang uri rin po ng communication. So ano-ano po ba yung mga uri ng communication? So first is the verbal communication. From the word verbal means magsasalita po tayo or pwedeng magsulat. So the basic definition of the verbal communication, it refers to the form of communication in which a message is transmitted verbally. Pwedeng verbally or pwedeng written po ang pagkakapasa ng message. Depende kung by mouth or by paper po. Then, ito nga po, we have the two types of verbal communication, which is oral, sa pagsalita po, or yun nga po. Then, another is the written. So, yun po yung types or dalawang uri ng verbal communication. The oral, which is we're going to use spoken words. Then written, we're going to write signs or symbols to communicate. And then next po, next type of communication is the nonverbal communication. So nonverbal, ibig sabihin hindi tayo gagamit ng salita rito. So the meaning of nonverbal communication, the sending or receiving of wordless messages. So wordless messages, walang sulat, walang salita. So, pwede po itong maipasa or makapaggawa ng non-verbal communication through gestures and touch, body language, posture, facial expression, or eye contact. So, yung mga yon pwede pong gamitin. Halimbawa, tinitigan ako ni Mrs. Hindi ako, yung ibang mister na lang pala. Yung halimbawa, tinitigan. So, anong ibig sabihin? Tinitigan ng masama. Ibig sabihin, may nagawang masama si mister. So, that is an example of non-verbal. Pwedeng sa posture. Sa posture naman po, yung halimbawa ay nakasanumbaba habang nakikinig, which is hindi attentive. Facial expression. Pwede rin makita ang facial expression. Kahit hindi ka nagsasalita, pwede makita kung masaya ka ba o malungkot. Then, another type of wordless or non-verbal communication is the paralanguage. Ano nga po pala ang paralanguage? So, paralanguage, okay po, paralanguage po, ito po bali yung mga elements ng non-verbal speech. So, bali po, ito yung ang mga elements po nito ay yung mga in terms of pag-speaking po is the voice quality, yung rate ng pagsasalita, yung pitch, volume, and speaking style. So, ito, in terms of kahit na sabihing nagsasalita tayo, pero may ibang meaning yung sinasabi natin. Depende dun sa tono, kung paano tayo magsalita, at paano natin iparating yung mensahe. Halimbawa yung mga sarcastic na pananalita, "Ang ganda-ganda mo today." Pero hindi talaga yun ang gusto nilang ano, nanggigigil sila. Halimbawa lang naman. So that is an example of paralanguage which is part of non-verbal communication po. Next is the formal communication. Pag sinabing formal communication, ito nga po formal, and official style of communication. So ito yung kadalasan ginagamit sa mga matataas or mga business. So ito po yung examples niya. We have the corporate meetings and the conferences. So po, yun ang formal communication naman po. Then next is the informal communication. So pag informal naman po, casual lang. Done casually using channels that are in contrast with formal communication channels. So imbis na mag-meeting, hindi po meeting ang ginagamit. Imbis na conferences, hindi po conferences ang ginagamit. So casual talking lang to within workmates or family, friends. Yan po ang informal communication. Then kasali rin to mamaya sa isang part ng discussion natin in the um, classification of organizational communication. And then, the last type of communication is the listening. So, yung pakikinig lang po is another type of communication yan. Makinig ka lang, that is communicating. So, sabi rito, a selective activity that involves the reception and the interpretation of oral stimuli. So, yung pag-receive and interpret ng messages sa pamagitan ng pakikinig, that um, ng pag-interpret ng narinig or nung na-receive na information, that is listening po. Then we have two types of listening, which is the passive listening and active listening po. So pag sinabing passive listening, so nakukuha to or malalaman nating passive listener or passive listening po ay yung receiver ay hindi nakukuha yung buong message. Bali parang may na kulang na word doon sa na-receive niyang message or pwedeng hindi niya talaga nakuha yung message na yun. That is passive listening. Then next is the active listening po. So ito naman yung listening with a purpose po. So nakikinig siya dahil may purpose siya. So nakukuha niya lahat or na kaya niyang makapagbigay ng feedback after niya makinig po. So that is those are the types of communication po. Next is the classification of organizational communication. Okay, dito naman po sa classification of organizational communication. So, may apat na classification siya. Una dito is the upward communication po. So, upward communication is defined as the communication of subordinates to superiors or employees to managers po. So, since upward to, simula sa pinakamababang posisyon, ang makikipag-communicate sila yung sender, papunta doon sa um, sa mga higher rank officers o sa matataas na employee po. Halimbawa, employee to manager po, ganun po ang mangyayari. Tulad ng sabi sa definition. So, may iba't ibang way para makakapag-communicate ang isang employee papunta sa mga manager or sa mas matataas pang nasa posisyon. First is open door policy. So, dito naman po sa open door policy, bali ay allowed po rito or napapractice po rito yung mga employees na pwedeng makipag-usap sa management. Direct po na makipag-usap sa management. That is open door policy. Pero kung hindi po applicable ang open door policy, may tinatawag po tayong serial communication. So dito naman po pag serial communication po, bali ito yung pag-relay or pagbigay ng message from an employee papunta sa mga superiors. So according sa ranking or hierarchy po bali to. So isa-isa paakyat po yung messages. Pero dito po sa serial communication, may disadvantages. May disadvantage siya bali. Ang disadvantage niya po is posibleng maiba yung message. Pwedeng ibahin yung tinatawag nating para language niya, yung context niya, in terms of the voice and intonation, or pwedeng mabago yung pagre-relay ng message po. So, may iba yung pagdating sa itaas po. So, yun ang disadvantage lang ng serial communication. Pero ito, proseso nga lang. Maproseso rin siya. Kasi simula sa manager, paaakyat pa isa-isa. So, another is yung survey. Bali, ito naman po yung mga types ng upward communication na to is para maiwasan yung serial communication, yung mga disadvantages nun. So, ito po yung mga example ng upward communication rin, which is through survey para malaman na kung anong mga mali. Sa survey ang kumpanya kung may mga mali ba sa ibaba or makikita silang um, ah, hindi nasasatisfy yung mga employee sa pamumuno. Pwede rin magkaroon ng focus groups. Bali sa focus groups naman po yung group interview to. So, i-interviewin yung isang grupo kung anong masasabi nila doon sa isang sa pamamalakad ng ng isang organization. So dito ma-obtain kaya agad yung responses. Unlike sa survey, annual kasi siya, matatagalan pa yung pag-evaluate. Unlike dito, direct from the certain group. And the next is the exit interviews. Ito, isa rin tong direct na makukuha ang sagot or yung evaluation. Exit interviews sa makukuha to dun sa mga umaalis na employee. Kung bakit sila umaalis, ano nangyari, kung bakit gusto nila umalis. Next is the suggestion boxes. So, ito naman po yung mga boxes na nakikita natin. Pwede rin sila magbigay ng hinain dyan or complaints nila. Then next is the third party facilitators po. Bali, ito magkakaroon ng parang ombudsperson na mamagitan po. So, those are the upward communication and yung mga uri niya kung paano pwedeng makapag-communicate yung lower rank employee sa itaas. Next is yung kabaligtaran naman niya, which is the downward communication. So sa downward communication, ito naman yung kabaligtaran nga, the communication from the superiors or management to the employees. So sumula sa taas pababa. Pero paano nila nire-relay yung messages? Ito po yung mga iba't ibang uri nila para mapagbigay ng messages or ng information, which is first is the bulletin boards. Yung mga announcement po, pwede nilang ilagay dyan sa bulletin boards na pinapapost ng mga nasa higher position. Another is the policy manual po. Policy manual, usually, ito yung halimbawa sa student manual para at least may alam na sila kung anong policy or patakaran doon ng isang organization. Next is the newsletter po. And then next is the intranets. Ang intranets naman po ay parang organization-wide versions of internet po. So, parang bulletin rin siya para papalitan na yung iba na yung bulletin board, policy manual, and newsletter, intranet siya. Gumagamit nga lang siya ng internet or sa website siya bali makita. So, yun naman po yung sa downward communication. Next classification is the business communication po. So, business communication, the communication which relates to the business-related information among employees, management, and customers. Bali dito naman po is ang pinaparating is usually business-related messages po or information. Kasi doon sa iba, pwedeng complaints, hindi related sa business. Sa downward naman, pwedeng halimbawa, sa bulletin nagpo-post kung sino may birthday nito, parang masasayang bagay lang doon sa mga part ng or methods ng pag-relay ng communication. Hindi lahat or hindi negative dito, most on business related. So, mga methods niya, ito ay through memos, magbibigay ng memo, telephone calls and faxes, pwedeng through email and voicemail, and business meetings. So, yun naman ang sa business communication. Usually, ang memos ang natatanggap natin sa as teacher po. Yun yung sa organization natin. Hindi, Pwede ring email sa ngayon dahil sa pandemic, email na ang kadalasang nare-receive natin. And then, the last one is the informal communication. So, na-discuss ko na rin to kanina, casual or unofficial form of communication wherein the information is exchanged spontaneously between two or more persons without confirming the prescribed rules, processes, system, formalities, and change of command. So dito, casual nga po sila nag-uusap dito. Bali, ang method dito, isa lang po ang nakita ko, which is the grapevine. Ang grapevine po ay consists of two very known um, way or channels. Ito po yung ay bali known as nilalaman ng grapevine messages po, information. Yun ay yung rumors and gossips. So dito, since informal nga po, kadalasan chismis lang po ang laman. Halimbawa, may tumaas ang rank or na-promote nang wala namang ginagawa, nagkakaroon ng ganitong communication between the employees or pwedeng sa higher ups. So that is the grapevine. Nilalaman niya ay rumors and gossip po. So yun ang mga um, classification of organizational communication. So last part of the organizational communication is the barriers to effective communication within the workplace po. So in the workplace, may iba't ibang balakid po tayo upang magkaroon ng effective communication. At kung hindi po effective ang communication, ay hindi po magiging productive ang workplace or yung isang organization. So first barrier is the physical barriers. So ito po ay kasama po sa mga physical barriers ay yung mga wall, pinto, doors, and mga dividers po. Lahat ng nakakabalakid upang hindi magkarinigan ang mga magkakatrabaho or mga tao sa organization. Those are physical barriers. Next is the perceptual barriers, background, and bias. So dito yung mga attitudes, preconceived attitudes affect his ability to listen. So, ano nga po yung mga biases, mga background story, background ng character ng isang tao within the organization that could be a barrier po upang hindi magiging effective ang communication. Next is the cultural barrier. So, ito naman po, from based on cultural, iba't ibang kultura ang pinanggalingan. So, since iba ang kultura, posibleng maging hadlang yon upang magkaintindihan ng maayos po. Pwedeng magkaroon ng, since cultural barrier po to, pwedeng magkaroon ng clash or alitan between the two cultures na kinasanayan ng dalawang tao or ng dalawang grupo within the organization. Next is the emotional barrier po. Kasi yung iba po naman ay lack of self-confidence or self-esteem. So, pwedeng maging sensitive pag ganun po. At since ganun po sila, mahirapan po silang makapag-communicate. So, that is emotional barrier naman po. Next is the gender barrier. So, dito sa gender barriers po, kasi alam po natin in terms of gender, men and women, may iba't ibang kaisipan. So, halimbawa, kaisipan nga ng ibang lalaki ay yung lalaki ang may kaya ng lahat dahil lalaki sila, mas malakas sa babae. And then, yung isip naman ng babae, kaya rin namin yan. So, posibleng doon ay maging barrier po yun upang magkaintindihan yung dalawang panig, yung dalawang gender. Next is the language barrier naman po. So, sa language barrier, ito po yung halimbawa language, may iba't ibang language na hindi common sa iba. Halimbawa, yung word na sakalam, hindi alam ng iba na malakas yon. So, baka pag yung sa iba pumunta yan, iba interpretation, magkakaroon ng misunderstanding. So, yun po ang example ng language barrier po. And then, we have the interpersonal and attitudinal barriers po. So, ito, in terms of interpersonal and attitude ng isang individual po. So dito naman po kasi siya yung mismong ayaw communicate or may iwas sa communication, dumidistansya dahil um, ayaw niyang magkaroon ng negative expression or impression sa kanyang mga tao. So that is interpersonal and attitudinal barriers po. Pasensya na po, nabubulol po. Then the last two, we have the environmental and ourselves. Environmental po is yung halimbawa po yung anything na nakakaapekto in terms of the environment. Halimbawa yung mga ilaw, maliliwanag na ilaw. Halimbawa yung attractive person, may artistang dumaan. Yun po yung mga example ng distraction in terms of environmental. And then we have yung ourselves po. Kasi some of the people focus lang sa sarili. At ito ay nagkasisilbing misinterpretation or confusion para sa ibang tao. Pagka ganun lang ang focus na lang sa sarili. So, nagkakaroon ng misunderstanding and miscommunication po. So, yun po yung iba't ibang barrier na dapat nating tanggalin para magkaroon ng effective communication sa workplace upang maging successful po ang workplace natin. So, that's all for the organizational communication. Now, let's proceed to the next part, which is the organizational culture. First, let's define what is culture. Culture, the beliefs, customs, arts, social institution, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or social group. So, bali naman po yung culture, ito yung mga nakasanayan ng isang grupo or isang bansa, mga kultura nila kung anong ginagawa doon sa certain group of people na yon. Then we have the organizational culture, system of shared meanings held by members that distinguish the organization from other organizations po. So ito naman, since organizational culture, same, yun nga po, mga nakasanayan. So dito, nakasanayan within that organization, kung anong kultura nila. Halimbawa, sa public school, since ikaw yung bago, parang ikaw yung utusan. Halimbawa lang naman po, may ganun kasing kultura dati sa public school na pagbago ka, ikaw yung parang maaalila. So, that is an example of organizational culture. Pero ngayon, sa tingin ko, nawawala na naman yung ganung kultura. Nababago na. So, that is the culture and organizational culture po. Then next, katulad ng communication, may iba't ibang characteristics, function, and parts tong organizational culture. First is being on having innovation and risk taking. So in a given organization dapat meron tayo nito. Ito yung isang kultura natin. Another is attention to details. So dapat nakapokus tayo sa details. Outcome of orientation, people orientation and team orientation, aggressiveness and stability. Ito yung iba't ibang characteristics of organizational culture po. So hindi ko na siya masyadong i-elaborate. So very self-explanatory naman po yan. Next is the functions of culture within an organization. So, bali po rito, next naman po is the functions of culture within an organization. So, culture has a boundary defining role. So, dito may boundaries po bali. Kung hanggang saan lang po yung pwedeng gawin ng mga employee, mga manager, or yung mga tauhan within the organization. Next is culture conveys a sense of identity. So, kailangan may sense of identity sila. Next is culture facilitates the generation of commitment. Then another is called culture enhances social system stability. So, stability of the social system o yung magkakaroon ng socialization within the organization. The next is a culture serves as a sense-making and control mechanism. And these are the function of the culture within an organization. So, let's have next the elements of culture. So, ano ba mga elements ng culture po? So we have observable elements and not observable elements. So first, in the observable, we have the practices. So practices are observable cultural customs. So pwedeng itong ceremonies na ginagawa annually or mga recreational activities. Depende po sa practices. Para sa organization naman po yung ginagawa nila. The next is the language. Language is a shared system of vocal sounds, written signs, or gestures used to convey meaning among members of the culture. So, halimbawa, sa language po or dito sa language, yung sa Nike, yung symbol ng Nike. So, kala lang natin check lang yun. Pero, ang symbol po ng Nike, yung swoosh na yon ay inspired by the Greek goddess of Nike, Greek goddess Nike, yung winged goddess of victory. So, yun ang ibig sabihin nung swoosh na yon. So, meaning success po ang ibig sabihin niyan. So, alam po natin ang Nike successful for sa shoes company. At nag-excel na rin sila sa ibang product. So, yun yung example ng language na hindi natin alam pero doon sa within the organization, common or alam na nila yon. Next is the symbols. Symbols are any visible objects, acts, or event that conveys meaning to others. Example po nito ay artifacts. Dress. Kasi dress code po. Depende kung halimbawa ay sa organization, kailangan naka-corporate attire lang sila. Ganon. Dress code po. Or with may specific uniform. Then office layouts and ceremonies. Yun mga symbols naman. Elements of culture rin yun. Then the not observable, we have the norms. Norms are rules that govern behaviors of groups of people. So dito yung parang certain rule within the culture pero hindi natin basta-basta nakikita to na sila lang nakakaalam. Next is the values are the basic beliefs. People hold that specify general preferences and behaviors. So values, ito yung mga basic beliefs nila within that given organization. Parang sa kultura nila na ito yung pinapaniwalaan nila. Then, almost the same lang to ng assumption or shared assumptions. Ito naman yung mga thoughts na and feelings na yung mga bawat membro ay ng kultura na yon ay pinapaniwalaan. Kahit ayaw mo maniwala since pasok ka dun sa organization at ito yung kultura, no? Kultura. So, kailangan paniwala mo totoo yon. So, yan ang assumptions. So, ito yung mga iba't ibang uri ng elements ng culture. Next is the types of organizational culture. So, ano-ano ba yung mga types nun? So, we have first the bureaucratic. Bureaucratic, a formal organization structure whose members share common attitudes, values, beliefs, orientations, and sentiments which are distinguished from others. So, dito naman sa bureaucratic, nangunguna rito ay may hierarchy, may sunod-sunod ng ranking. Then, meron pong pinapahalagaan po rito yung stability. Stability ng given culture. And then, dito ay pinapahalagaan po o yung pinapangunahan to ng mga formal rules and standard operating procedure po. So, yun ang sa bureaucratic. May standard operating procedure sila rito. Example is yung government ministries. May mga standard operating procedure sila lagi in terms of work. Next is the clan culture. Clan culture, a family-like or tribe-like type of corporate environment that emphasizes consensus, commonality of goals and values. So dito naman sa clan culture, ang ginagawa rito, yung behavior ng mga individual or mga employees dito ay hinuhubog ng mga tradition, loyalty, and personal commitment po. At dito rin po ay naniniwala dito sa clan culture na yung unity ay makakukuha through socialization. And then, mahalaga rin dito ang teamwork. And then dito po, pinapaniwalaan na yung mga long-term employees ay magsaserve as mentor. So, yun ang saklan culture po. Next is the market culture. Sa market culture naman po, it's a type of corporate culture that emphasizes competitiveness not only between the organization and its market competitors, but also between the employees. So dito, pinapahalagaan ay yung kompetensya. So, para magkaroon ng pag-unlad yung given culture na yun or organization. So, dito, pinapahalagaan po yung pagkakaroon ng pag-achieve ng measurable and demanding goals po. Yun ang concern nila rito. Since market-based and financial-based po ang culture na to. Another is nakapokus sila sa sales growth, profitability, and market share. So more on focus on pagkita since market culture to. Then dito yung relationship ng mga individuals ay based on contractual po. Na pinag-usapan na nung halimbawa sa interview, previously agreed na to. So dito naman rin sa market culture, yung mga managers ay hindi ginajudge or ina-evaluate kung gaano sila ka-effective as role models or mentors. Ginajudge sila based on the profits na nakukuha nila based on the annual performance goals nila. So that is market culture. And then last one is the entrepreneurial culture. An environment where someone is motivated to innovate, create, and take risks. So dito we have the risk-taking. Dapat risk-taking ang mga individuals dito. So para magkaroon ng innovation o magkaroon ng pagbabago. So dito values innovation and creativity. So yun ang pinapahalagan sa entrepreneurial. So yun na po bali ang apat na classification or types ng organizational culture. So next is yung relationship between organizational culture and performance. So ano bang relationship nila? So dito, organizational culture is a significant predictor of organizational performance. So bakit naging ganun? So meron po tayong kasunod dito na a positive and strong culture can make an average individual perform better. So sabi dito predictor and then makakapaggawa ng yung average individual na maging better. Dahil kung may magandang kultura or strong culture ang meron ng isang organization, ibig sabihin makakapag-perform na maayos yung mga taong nasa loob ng organization na to. So, parang sinasabi rito na um, positive culture, strong culture ang meron tayo, magandang performance ang maibibigay natin or mabibigay ng given organization. Pero kung hindi maganda ang kultura within that organization, pwedeng bumagsak ang organization na yon. Dahil hindi maganda magiging performance at hindi maganda ang services na mabibigay ng given organization na yon. So, yun ang relationship. So, dapat magandang culture equals to magandang performance. Then, ano po ba ang strong culture? So, ang strong culture naman po, the organization's core values are both intensely held and widely shared. So, dapat dito pinapahalagahan yung kultura or yung mga values nung within the organization. Halimbawa, ang motto nila ay going up lang or success. So, dapat panindigan nila yon at hindi nila dapat bitawan. Pag binitawan nila halimbawa yung culture na yon, manatiwalag sila, pwedeng bumagsak ang isang organization or hindi maging effective or ka-productive yung isang organization. Then, paano ba tayo makakakuha or makakagawa ng strong organizational culture? So, building a strong organizational culture, ito po yung mga kailangan natin tandaan para maging maganda ang performance rin ng organization. So, first is common behavioral style must be shared by managers and employees. Next is have the same basic approaches to solving problems, meeting goals, and dealing with stakeholders. Another step is have Share common norms that guide rule governing rewards and punishment po. And then the last one, a strong organizational culture assists in the creation of a stable organization, the consequence of which lead to the achievement of the company's strategic goals. So ito po yung mga steps or mga kailangan tandaan para magkaroon ng strong organizational culture. And that will be the end of my report po. So tandaan lang po natin, this is from Catherine Pulsifer. Communication is one of the most important skills you require for a successful life. So, bago tayo magkaroon ng magandang kultura, siyempre dapat may communication rin tayo at dapat magkaroon rin ng magandang communication upang maging successful. So, that's all for my report. Thank you and God bless po. Thank you for listening.